Well, hello again. This is Merle Dimbath, your economist with an optimistic point of view, saying hello. And we're going to get right into a discussion of what happened at Jackson Hole this past week. But first, I did receive some email from some of you about my discussion last week regarding the explanation of basis points. We hear that in an expression to raising or lowering interest rates. Another go here. Basis points explained. One basis point is 1/100th of a percent. You would write that as 0.01. 100 basis points then would be 1 percentage point. 50 basis points would be 0.5% or 0.5. And I've given here an example of a penny or a cent being 1/100th of a dollar. And you would write that as a $0.01, or 100 cents equals $1, and 50 cents equals $0.50. And I'm sorry for any confusion, but you're going to hear a lot about this with reference to the forthcoming meeting in September, around the middle of September, 15th, 16th, as I recall, of the Federal Open Market Committee, when they will meet again to discuss interest rates. And the market is excited about what they heard at Jackson Hole this past week. Federal Reserve Chairman Powell exceeded all expectations this past week regarding his outlook for interest rates. He did specifically promise a rate reduction in September, but the tone of the voice and the other concerns that were expressed, particularly with reference to possible weakening in the labor market, led the market to believe that absolutely we're going to have a reduction in short-term interest rates, which hopefully will result in some longer-term interest rates, particularly mortgage rates coming down. And the market really took off. Averages hit all-time highs again toward the end of the week. And the pre-markets for the coming week indicate another strong point. It's good at this point to review some things that we reviewed last week with reference to what conclusions we could draw if the Fed did indeed lower interest rates. This conclusions, one of them that the Fed was yielding to political pressure. That may or may not be the case, but there's no doubt about it that the Fed is definitely backing away from an immediate return to a 2% inflation rate. They apparently are somewhat soft, so this leads us to conclude that both items 2 and 4 apparently are part of the Fed's thinking right now, that the potential advantages of lower interest rates, such as lower home mortgage rates and stimulation to the economy, exceed the possible disadvantages. And of course, the disadvantage would be inflation and more inflation. We are, as we've noted before, a long way from 2% inflation rate. There has been a lot of discussion regarding independence of the Fed, with reference particularly to lowering interest rates. President Trump has made no bones about it. He does want lower interest rates and has verbally expressed these opinions time and again, and even have said some disparaging remarks about Chairman Powell. But you begin to wonder, where was this independence concern when we really needed it? And all we have to do is go back a short period of time to look at really 48 bad months where, regardless of what the powers that be wanted then, the Fed was really ready and willing to accommodate. I've got a chart here which I have titled 48 Bad Months from December 2020 to December 2024. And 3 things are interesting to note: that during that 48-month period, population increased from 331 million to 340 million, an increase of a little over 2.5%. Probably a good portion of that increase, some 9 million, a good portion of that was illegal immigrants coming across the southern border. I don't know exactly the amount there, but there's been several estimates. But what really concerns me is the increase in the national debt. Now, national debt figures are for the fiscal year. The U.S. government fiscal year ends September 30th. So when I say 2020 here, that is the period of time ending September 30th, 2020. At that time, the national debt was $32.67 trillion, still a lot of money. And the consumer price index, with 82.84 being the base of 100, was a little over 260. 4 years later, look what's happened. Well, the population increased by a little over 2.5%, but the national debt rose by over 8%, over 8.5%, up to over $35 trillion. But look at what happened to the CPI as a result of expansion of the national debt. And as we will see, the expansion of the money supply in connection with that, the consumer price index went up over 21%. And we're still experiencing that today. Once prices go up, they don't come down. The inflation that we are experiencing today, it may only be 2.8% or whatever the current reading is, but that's on top of this 21% increase that we had. Consequently, everybody is feeling the effects of inflation. On the graph here, we can see the sharp increase in prices there during that period of time, 20, 21, 22. On the graph there, you can note that at May 2020, the reading was 255 and change. A short time later, in June of 2022, the reading had increased to 295. No doubt about it, inflation was really taking off during that period of time when the national debt was increasing, and as we will momentarily see, when the money supply was increasing. This chart tells the story. We're looking at an increase in the money supply and over a period of time with various components. The money supply, of course, is made up of currency, but as you can see, the currency is a minor portion of the total money supply. We sometimes hear the expression about the Fed running the printing presses. Well, currency does increase over a period of time, but not as much as other forms of money. The main forms of money are what is called demand deposit liabilities or other forms of deposits. These essentially are various kinds of checking accounts. When you make a deposit of, say, cash or your payroll check into a local bank, you are given credit on your checking account for the amount of the deposit. But from the point of view of the bank, that is carried on their books as something called a demand deposit liability. And as we can see, if you increase demand deposit liabilities, you increase the money supply. For example, there in December of 2020, the M1, which is the more conservative measure of the money supply, which is basically currency in circulation, various types of demand deposits, which are the checking accounts at your bank, or other forms of deposit that you might have, say, at a credit union or a savings account or some other savings arrangement that you may have. And as we can see, those are quite large. The so-called other liquid deposits are really the lion's share. But notice that over the period of time from December 20th to just a year later to December 21st, the increase in the total money supply, 14.4%. Now, obviously, our inflation was not increasing at that rate. Our population was not increasing at that rate. Neither was the gross domestic product. Neither were the number of people on the payroll. So clearly, money supply was very much on the upswing. Currency did increase, but by half the amount, about 7.9%. By far and away, the lion's share of the increase was a 43% increase in demand deposit liabilities. That is checkbook money. And that is made possible in a large measure by what the Federal Reserve does. When the Federal Reserve buys bonds, that starts a string of actions which ultimately increase demand deposit liabilities. Or whatever the government is spending money on, as soon as that money is deposited, there is an increase in demand deposit liabilities, and that is what increases the money supply. And we've seen a very sharp increase in a very short period of time, 43.2%. Other liquid deposits also went up roughly in line with currency at 7.8%. Well, what can we conclude? I indicated in my last report that changes were underway and we were going to be seeing changes. Now, as a result of the speech by Federal Reserve Chairman Powell, it indicates that we are definitely going to be in for some more inflation. We are going to see lower interest rates, and that will be positive. People need to buy houses, and there's been a lot of deferred purchases. People have had to rent because they couldn't afford to buy. So if we can see interest rates come down with reference to mortgages, that's going to be a big help. On the other side, We're going to be building some strong inflationary pressures, and you can see this already being manifested in the prices of other commodities and securities. The stock market is going up in anticipation of expansion, and you're seeing strong demand for things like gold and silver. So that concludes our message for today. I'll see you next time.